Continuing with our last game, I wanted to show another one where there's a key idea in the position in this line in the Catalan that you need to know if you're playing white. So let's go ahead and jump into this position. And normally, once we get here, black plays bishop e7, and we have a pretty typical standard closed Catalan position. But this is a key feature that you need to know if you're playing this position with white. If black plays bishop d6 straight away here, this is actually a bad position. White simply is playing for e4 now in an accurate manner to force black to waste time and get a worse position. So let's see it in motion. Knight c3, knight d2, key move, followed by e4. Now, I'd like to go back and show when bishop d6 is appropriate, because it's a very, very select time. So if I come back and I use a pure Catalan move order, major difference here is if I go bishop b4 check and white plays bishop d2, only then can I play lines with bishop d6. Because compare this position to the line in the main game that I just showed you. There is not going to be a knight c3 and knight d2 because there's a bishop there, so the e4 plan does not work. These types of minor features is exactly what you need to look for in your memory markers when you're studying your openings. This is what I really highlight in my courses on Chessable. I try to pinpoint the similar positions, and the memory marker is what you need for the plan that is going to give you the advantage in the position, or the key idea that holds it all together for you. Keep in mind that I'm not a big fan of suggesting these bishop b4 check lines, because white has move orders at his disposal to where I can backdoor my way into a Catalan and never play d4. So essentially, once we get here, if you only have a repertoire based off of bishop b4 check, you're now forced to either choose between the open or closed as opposed to the check lines. So keep that in mind if you're preparing the system for black, and I go over this pretty much in detail in the Aggressive Queen's Gambit Decline course on Chessable. So let's come back to the main game, and as a refresher, we'll go back through the moves that when we see this bishop d6, the alarm bell should go off. Knight c3, knight d2, and then e4. And when you check the database, this position just has a monstrous score for white. Takes, and we have the key idea. Black has given up the center, and at the same time given a problem to that bishop on d6, asking him what he's doing there at all. So he needs to waste time. And at this point, with the bishop on c7, we're going to go ahead and bother the queen and create a pawn weakness and drop the bishop back to his best square where he's flexible. And this is the first move in the game where I have to think, and I believe there was only one other game in the database, and I was in good company where it was an international master or grandmaster rated around 2450 FIDE who had played this position with white. And he played knight c3, I believe. I went with queen b3, just keeping an eye on b7 as well as the x-ray on the g8 king. Seemed flexible enough, and I wanted to vacate the d1 square for my rooks. King h8, reasonable enough. Seems like you're going to get counterplay with e5, so getting the king off of the dangerous diagonal makes sense. So I prevent e5 or c5 in a different way, x-raying the queen. Gets off of that. Now, this is where the plan is not clear to me anymore, what I should be doing. So I figure I'm going to slam in the center, or I'm going to allow black to slam the center. So if he ever plays e5, I'm just going to push straight away with d5. So let's prep. Rook d2, rook a d1. If the action's going to be happening in the center, let's go ahead and invite everybody to the party. Very clean, easy development. Now after b6, I see my opponent trying to solve his problems, getting the bishop on b7. So let's go ahead and bother that pawn on c6. And then queen a4. Simply hitting a7 and c6. So decisions need to be made by black. And he blows up the board with c5. And this simply isn't good enough, and the problems have come boiling to a head for black. Queen takes a7, we grab a pawn, and there's really no way for black to punish us here. Rook a8, I simply go queen b7, and I have many escape squares on the h1 a8 diagonal. So c takes d4. Bishop takes is probably more accurate, but I like the flexibility of rook takes. Goes bishop e5, and I'm up material, so I'm happy to trade down, and also notice that I have more coordination than black has. And for that reason, I'm able to keep the tempo going here. Rook e8. Now, I'm up material, trade down, but what's the best trade? Taking on b8 or taking on e8? In this case, taking on e8 distracts the rook from the job that he was doing, defending the pawn, and now we essentially have a forced win in this ending. Black does make a decent decision here. I mean, there's not many decisions to make, trying to ruin the pawn structure and create an imbalance, but notice how this knight is really blocked out of the game by his own pawn and my rook. So I've got this pawn phalanx that is going to menacingly and slowly march up the board with good effect. So at this point, it's a matter of technique. So let's go ahead and see it for completionist sake. a5, it's got to watch the a pawn, so let's start pushing our other guys. e5, trying to open up the square for his knight, but then he puts his king there. And like I said, slowly and menacingly, they march up the board. c5, and don't be in a hurry here. It's easy to play rook d8 in these things, but I wanted to absolutely maximize the position before doing anything. I mean, in fact, I could start playing moves on the king side as well, because black's going to run out of moves here quite quickly. a6, knight c6, and I did miss the simple rook d6 check here. I was so focused on squeezing every move out of the position that I missed the simple ones. And that's one of my common themes. When I'm not studying tactics on a daily basis, I miss the one movers like this. Rook d8, and happy to just trade down. You take, ends with check, and then I queen the a pawn. So my opponent mixes it up there and takes, but it's just not enough, as there's nothing black can really do here. If he would have played, say, g5, for instance, I can just go rook c7 in order to force the trade of rooks, and it's a trivial endgame at that point. But after king f5, I took on g7, and my opponent resigned. So hopefully this was another instructive game, because it had a key idea in the opening that you need to know in order to take advantage of an inaccuracy by black. Catalan.